Hello again and welcome everyone to the 77th meeting of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Review Committee. My name is Melanie O'Brien and I am the designated federal official to the Review Committee. I'd like to welcome the Review Committee members, National NAGPRA program staff, and all in attendance today. I'm pleased that these virtual meeting formats have allowed so many of you to join the meeting. This is the third in a series of meetings scheduled over the next month or so. The meeting schedule is available on the National NAGPRA program events page, and I'll post a link to that in the chat. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. The recording, transcripts, and meeting minutes will be made publicly available after this meeting and will include the names of all those in attendance at today's call. If you object to this in any way, you may disconnect at this time. This is a meeting of the Federal Advisory Committee established by the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA, of 1990. And this meeting is regulated by the Federal Advisory Committee Act, FACA, and its implementing regulations. This meeting was noticed in the Federal Register on December 10th, 2021. The agenda for this meeting and the materials for the meeting have been posted to the NAGPRA program events page. A link is in the chat. The FACA charter governs the objectives and scope of activities of this committee. The purpose of the review committee is to monitor and review the implementation of the inventory and identification process, as well as repatriation activities under sections 5, 6, and 7 of the Act. The review committee is also responsible for reporting to Congress on the progress and any barriers encountered in carrying out its responsibilities. With that as an introduction, I'd like to do a roll call of committee members. Please answer out loud. John Beaver.
Present.
Honor Keeler.
Present.
Timothy McEwen.
Present.
Frank McManaman.
Present.
Shelby Tisdale.
Present.
And Barnaby Lewis. I think Barnaby was going to try to call in. And once I see he is joined by phone, I should be able to make him able to speak. Hopefully Barnaby will be able to join us soon. I'm just checking to see if there are anyone joined by phone, and I don't see one. Currently, the committee has 6 appointed members. The charter for the review committee does not contain a quorum requirement, and a meeting may be held with fewer than 7 members present. FACA requires that the committee membership be fairly balanced in terms of point of view represented and functions to be performed. As the designated federal official, I have determined that this meeting can proceed with currently 5 members, hopefully a 6th to be joining you soon. Frank McManaman was selected as chair of this committee. Mr. Chair, I hereby call this meeting to order.
Thank you, Madam DFO. I had asked Barnaby to make a traditional opening to the meeting, and he had agreed, but that doesn't seem to be possible right this moment. Perhaps we should go ahead and proceed with the agenda, and then when Barnaby is able to get back to us and we can hear him, maybe we could, if he wants to, we could have a more traditional beginning to the meeting, but a little bit farther down in the agenda. If that would be suitable, why don't we proceed? Any of the review committee members have an objection to that or an alternative? I don't see any hands raised. So, Madam DFO, why don't we go ahead on the agenda? Oh, hold it. I see something from Barnaby. Is there just a message in the chat?
Yes, it says that he's calling in on the phone. I still don't see a phone number in the attendee list to be able to allow him to speak. Ah, here he is.
Okay, great. Hello, Barnaby, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I just mentioned that you had graciously agreed to open the meeting with the traditional prayer. I wonder, good, I can see you now as well.
Yes. Okay, yes,
If-
I'll go ahead and
if you-
attend to
if
that.
you- If you're still willing to do that, we'd appreciate it.
Yes. This afternoon, we want to ask the Creator for His blessing for this meeting to be with us as we hear all the numerous matters that come before us today, and give us that understanding and respect for one another and the public as we discuss these sensitive matters of all concern to all the tribes. Natagdamatida da eden tak ijuki tani givum ta kapata da yeda humbape na pi masma chwe yeda kovner chani sisasigat vuje shishoik shurat spada eg masma chwe yeda chip moxi swam good chavuje nankamamse kotam nankamamse humachkam chitad and hugam masma chuchugi machimatachi chimanodak Upo mawapa chikwi at manako ko juko wichit akis agmasma matamde rava hiri musha yo kurete so mi tachi kibum te agmasma e matbusi to ju apo ai anye that sapo bum nyunyo fet agmasma e matamde busi to boy he da saptas kam suki kam pam je e da jeni agmasma e matamde ro juko baiti shurin e da kovner chani Matvusa Giuseppe Wufo it Wurget. Wurs it is a Matitachico Itai, at Ahas in your Wurget. Wurs it is a Matmoitai, Ugama Wurget. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Barnaby, and thank you for your flexibility in joining us by telephone. Before we begin with the agenda, with the first item on the agenda, I would like to acknowledge the individuals who are assisting me in conducting this meeting today. With us today are two attorneys from the Department of the Interior's Office of the Solicitor, Brady Blasco with the Division of Parks and Wildlife, and Stephen Simpson with the Division of Indian Affairs. From the National NAGPRA program, Lisa Koszalski is the review committee coordinator responsible for organizing this meeting and preparing minutes and transcripts of these proceedings. Other members of the National NAGPRA program staff are in attendance today, and I greatly appreciate the support of the program staff as well as others within the Department of the Interior who have assisted me in preparing for this meeting today. And a big thank you to those of you who are joining us. Please note that the review committee is particularly interested in receiving comments on progress made and barriers encountered in implementing NAGPRA. If you're interested in providing public comment during this meeting or at future meetings, please let me know when I ask for public comment. You will be able to use the chat feature, or you can raise your hand to make a request to make public comment. You can also email me to make your request at nagpra_info@nps.gov. Before we continue with our agenda today, I would like to inform the committee and the audience that we have recently updated the agenda as well as the meeting materials. You can find both on the NAGPRA events page, again in the chat. I did not receive any requests for presentations for today's meeting. However, I did receive 2 disposition requests as well as 1 presentation request, and I've added those to the agenda as well as the meeting materials. If anyone would like to make a request for a presentation to the review committee, or if you would like to submit a request for a disposition, you can contact me at nagpra_info@nps.gov. In addition, the committee provided this morning a draft of its recommendations on the revisions to the regulations, which you will find in the meeting materials posted earlier this morning, I think around 9:30. In addition to the adjustments to our agenda for today and for future meetings, there's one other adjustment I need to request of the committee. The disposition request that is scheduled on the agenda as the second item. The presenters have asked to delay just a little bit in the course of the meeting so that all of their representatives may attend. They would like to provide their presentation today at 4:30 Eastern time. That's about an hour and 15 minutes from now. So we'll proceed with the meeting agenda. Mr. Chair, I'd look to you if you want to change the order of the agenda items in some way. But I will bring the presenters in at 4:30 Eastern time for that disposition request. The first item on the agenda is a call for public comments. So before we move into any other agenda items, I'd like to open up an opportunity for anyone to raise their hand or to put a comment in the chat if you would like to provide public comment. I am not seeing anyone at this time who has raised their hand or commented and request for a public comment. Mr. Chair, how would you like to proceed at this time?
Well, I think probably the best thing we can do, given the change of schedule, would be to move to the discussion of revisions to the regulations. And proceed with that and then continue that until 4:30, what would be about an hour and a half, as you said, from now. Unless the committee has other suggestions, why don't we go ahead and do that? Okay, seeing no objections, then there are 2 ways to approach, I think, where we are right now with our discussion. One would be to go back to the February 11th document that we started working on at the last meeting, where we went through, and I think we got through the first 6 or 8 pages of comments and questions on that document. These are comments that the committee compiled about the July 2021 version of the revised proposed revised regulations to the NAGPRA regs, and just continue through that. I think we had made it to the first section of that draft set of revisions to the regs, as well as to some general questions that we had at the beginning of that. The alternative, or an alternative, would be to pick up and look at the 4-page set of draft recommendations that the committee might make to the secretary about the regulation revisions that we compiled during the last 2 weeks, subsequent to the February 14th meeting, where the comments that we had there and the questions at least some of them, for some of them, we drafted into more recommendation language. So the committee could look at the specific recommendations and decide whether we wanted to push those forward to the secretary. Now, that might be a better way to proceed, actually, because if that works out, if we agree to some of these recommendations or all of the recommendations, then perhaps after the disposition request, we could come back to the longer document and continue working our way through that. Did any of the committee members have a preference there, or one way or the other? Okay, well, if not, then why don't we look at that 4-page document, the shorter document, and see if what we've drafted as recommendations, potential recommendations to the secretary makes sense. Madam Chair, I don't know whether you can share that document on your screen.
Yes, I can do that. Just a moment while it opens.
Okay, there, I can see it. Can all the review committee members see the document now?
Yes.
Okay, so I suggest we just go through the numbers and see what comments members have about them. The first 2 paragraphs of this document are just a summary of how we got to this point, and I don't think we need to belabor that particular text. But the first general recommendation is one that recommends to the secretary that more time be allowed for the review committee to review the draft proposed regulations, and points out that the time currently available in the meetings we have left in March, we think more time is needed. Do committee members agree with that recommendation? Is that something we want to go forward with? Is there some editing that people want to at least talk about, maybe give some direction on it? I would, the committee didn't have a long time to review the initial draft of these recommendations, but in the time that was available, you would have noticed that there are several of these initial recommendations about more time for review. There's one about more time that the tribes have asked for. There's another one that has been suggested about specifically traditional and religious leaders being consulted. It might be a good idea to wrap them all together and make it one general recommendation. That would be a possibility to shorten whatever list we come up with.
If I can just clarify the regulatory process for everyone's awareness, but in particular for those listening.
Yes, please.
As you all know, and as most of you listening know, the department released a draft of the regulatory text on July 8th in advance of tribal consultation. After tribal consultation in July and August of 2021, the department considered input from Indian tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations, and in December issued a letter to tribes stating that it would proceed to publication of a proposed regulation in the Federal Register in early 2022. There has not yet been a publication of a proposed regulation in the Federal Register, but it remains the department's plan to publish a proposed rule. Once the rule is published as proposed, there will be an opportunity for anyone to comment on the draft proposed text. That is a public opportunity for anyone to provide comment to the department on the regulatory text. Following that public comment, the department will then consider every comment that is received. The department will respond to the comments that are received and will proceed to publication of a final regulation incorporating any changes or suggestions from those comments.
Thank you for that brief civics lesson, Madam DFO. We understand that, the committee certainly understands that and anticipates that ultimately there will be this public review as appropriate and actually as legally required. What we are attempting to do is to provide, to ensure that the draft that the department eventually published as proposed for public comment is as effective a set of revisions as possible. So that our intent isn't to forestall or to propose an alternative, rather to work within the system as well. It ultimately would lead to a public review process for whatever the draft is. Given that framework, we have some recommendations now, or we're trying to develop some recommendations now, I guess I should say, that we can give to the secretary and that she and her staff can consider in a way that would improve whatever the proposed text that goes forward for public review might be. So having said that, committee members, any comments on number one in the general recommendations? Is this something that we do want to, a recommendation we do want to make to the secretary? Any comments on it? Oh, Honor, you've got a comment. You got your hand up. Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just earlier with a question that had been brought up to the committee about whether to keep these recommendations separate or to combine them. My recommendation is to keep them separate from each other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can't see everybody's hand. I apologize for that on the way my screen is set up. Are there other comments from the review committee? I can see Shelby and Honor. Barnaby, do you have any comment on this particular one?
No comment.
Thank you, Barnaby. John?
No comment on this recommendation at this time.
Okay. Tim?
I guess I would recommend that we consider changing the word recommends to requests throughout.
Okay. That sounds reasonable. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be any objection to this request, if we use that term. So why don't we say that at least preliminarily we would include this as one of our recommendations or one of our requests. Let's look at the second one then, which again recommends, or maybe requests is a better word here as well, that the secretary extend the tribal consultation period. I think those of us who have looked at least some of the letters that were received by the secretary of the department following the tribal consultation indicated that there was a general interest in fact, requests made by tribes and tribal organizations for further consultation prior to moving into the formal proposed review process. And I think that's what we're saying in this particular recommendation as well. Again, any comments or changes suggested here? Tim, you suggested requests to the first one. Would you think this is would be a better word in this context as well, or is this more recommends because it's not us, it's us asking the secretary, but on behalf of somebody else rather than our committee?
I don't think there's any problem with us requesting that as well. Request is a stronger word. I think we should use it whenever we can.
Okay, all right. John, any comment?
No, well, yeah, I guess one comment. I guess just going back to some of the comments I'd made in previous meetings. I mean, I certainly, I think certainly, yeah, should request this. One, the initial comments we see from the tribes. One, the initial comments were that just because of everything that was occurring, and in fact is still occurring, that that initial review period by the tribes was certainly short in duration, and thankfully it was extended. But I think we could probably possibly agree. I mean, even with that extension that was there for the comments to come in, that was still a pretty short time for the tribes to to all the tribal nations to adequately get their comments in. And I think that we've certainly either received in letter or heard through public comment that that even with that, they were still, many of the tribal nations were still rushing around and trying to really carefully review the proposed changes and digest what that was going to mean. Or it sounded like there was some concern that that were their comments they were providing to the interior, were they not were they adequate, but there was some concern there. They were rushed in their review of the changes. So I mean, I think we should firmly support that request or recommendation, the second recommendation, and just sort of reiterate that even with the extended time that was allowed, it was still the full length of time was still pretty short for a number of tribal nations, given everything that was and is still occurring.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, John. Honor, I can see you. I don't see your hand raised. You're okay with this particular one as well? Okay.
Yes, fine with it.
All right. And Barnaby, do you have something to add here as well, or?
No, nothing to add.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I take that then maybe we just generally, as Tim suggests, use requests rather than recommends on both 1 and 2, but we leave both 1 and 2 as requests that we want to make to the secretary. Looking at number 3, this recommends a database be developed. This is something that Honor's talked a couple of times about and was in her comments, general comments in the February 11th working document as well. Honor, I think I said in a email when I distributed this document, the concern I have with this isn't that it's not a great idea. I think it is something that ought to be, that the National NAGPRA program ought to have the resources to create and maintain. I was a little concerned about including it in any requests or recommendations that we were making that was focused on the regulations. Because while this would assist in implementing the law, I think, in terms of communication, it doesn't relate directly to anything specific in the recommendations. Do you want to give your opinion on why we should try to do this, or, and then if there are any other comments about it?
Sure, thanks, Frank. I think that there is a problem in notifying tribes and tribal historic preservation offices and repatriation representatives among the tribes in an adequate way. I mean, in the past, we've heard that people haven't received notice or they haven't been able to respond in time. And I think it would make sense that the Department of the Interior and hopefully the National NAGPRA program would develop this mechanism that allows information to get out to the tribes in a proper way in furtherance of government to government relations and consultation. And I don't want this to wait for our recommendations that end up perhaps going to Congress, but I'd rather this go directly to the Secretary of the Interior. And while it may not be a provision listed within the draft regulations currently, I do think it's part of the mechanism of completing this process. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. And as I said, I don't disagree that it's important. And in fact, I think John's comment that he just made about the tribes needing more time or wanting more time for consultation is kind of an indicator of that the same issue that we're trying to deal with by improving communications. Barnaby, do you have a comment you want to make on this?
Yeah, well, I'm not concerned that would really do any good, I guess. Even if the Secretary of Interior did do this, really difficult with, the great number of federally recognized tribes with their own form of government. It's difficult, whatever effort that the government makes or the Department of Interior makes in notifying tribes, it all falls with each individual tribal government. So if the tribal government not completely aware of who has responsibility within their tribal government for NAGPRA, and then there might be delays in them receiving them. As one Chippewa commented that the Chippewas weren't notified. We were notified right away, through our tribal government, even though it didn't come directly to us. But I think that our notification process from Department of the Interior is nothing wrong with the way that they're working. So I don't see not broken, then don't fix it. I don't think things are going to change any more than they are now. And it's just going to be a constant task for them to try to keep everything updated. Different leadership turns around, council representatives, tribal employees for those departments, and numerous other considerations. Those are just my thoughts.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much, Barnaby, for that. Any other comments on this particular one, number 3?
Hi, Frank. I'm not sure if you can see my hand. This is John.
Oh, hi, John, and then Tim after you. Yes, John, go ahead.
I tend to support. I understand the nature of that particular request. I do certainly understand where Barnaby is coming from, and perhaps maybe this is a question for the DFO. When the notices go out to the tribal government or to the tribes, they go out to the whatever the executive office or the points of contact that you do have directly for the tribes. Is that how that process works?
In the case of consultation on the draft regulations, the letter was issued by the assistant secretaries through a Dear Tribal Leader letter. And that was distributed in the way that all departmental Dear Tribal Leader letters are issued through the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs distributed those letters. So it wasn't the National NAGPRA program that had any involvement in distribution of those letters. They were distributed by the department through the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, and they were issued to tribal leaders as consultation on any regulation by the department or any number of other issues. It's the same method. And I can certainly tell you that the department is aware of the issues it has in distributing those letters and is working to improve its method of connecting with the right offices at tribal governments for those consultations.
Thank you, Melanie. And so just based on your comments, so then the understanding is that then it's I'm assuming to maintain and acknowledge and honor the government to government relationships that the federal government has with the tribes. And that's why it's going directly to the tribal leadership, just if I'm understanding your comments correctly.
That would be my understanding as well, John.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. That would just so then following up on Barnaby's comments, then I mean, although it seems that there's and as the DFO has acknowledged, there is some hang up in the process. It could be, as Barnaby has acknowledged, and I think those of us who work in tribal governments are with and for tribal governments are aware, some of those roles on the ground can change. And so I want to be supportive and understand. I think we all certainly understand the importance of that recommendation. But I think we are certainly aware too that there could be some issue in keeping track of those changes, or where to send those additional announcements to at the tribes, in addition to sending that to the tribal leadership.
Thank you, John. Tim, you had a comment.
Sure. I certainly understand the purpose of Honor's proposal here, and I agree that there is a problem in how things are distributed. I think it is in our best interest to make sure we can do whatever we can to improve that communication. And to that regard, I think that I guess I would support including this here, as well as other places, because we have essentially two ways that we can address issues like this. One is in this process, in consulting on these regulations, and I think there is a nexus between this proposal and the problem that we're trying to deal with here, and that the tribes identified pretty clearly in their comments on the draft proposal. So I guess I would support including this here, but I also think we might want to consider a version of this later when we get to doing the report to Congress, that we can talk to them about the need for better communication and talk to the congressional delegations on whether, I think we would probably want to formulate it as a funding proposal. So I guess I'm in favor of raising the issue wherever we can. I think it's a real issue. I think we have an interest in this, and I guess I would propose identifying this and pushing this forward whenever we can.
Do we, I'm sorry, are there any other comments before I make mine? I wonder if we want to rephrase it or add into it the some of the concerns that Barnaby, and I think Barnaby and both John and Tim, I think we all recognize that information, once it gets to a certain point, from the Department of the Interior to a tribe, or frankly, any other large organization, that it has to get distributed effectively within those organizations. And if that's an issue, maybe we can build that into the comment that the support is needed, sort of down the line of communication, to ensure effective communication from an office like the National NAGPRA program. Honor, you had your hand up there, I think, or did I miss C?
Hi, Frank, thanks. I did have my hand up. Part of consultation with tribes and NHOs should involve more than a mere letter. I think that's well-founded law and precedent that we know of about the consultation process. And so I think this mechanism provides some opportunity for properly conducting that consultation process. It is true that it's up to the tribes to decide how they would like to participate or consult. Certainly after that point, I agree with, but I think that more has to be done. So I'm thankful to the committee members who have supported this provision. I also agree with what Tim had said earlier about bringing this up in as many places as possible, in addition to these draft recommendations. I think that we should be writing a letter to the Secretary of the Interior, as well as certainly Congress, to bring this matter up.
Well, that was one of the things that struck me also, was that there may be other ways we can more effectively get this in front of the Secretary, but the idea of working on that as well in the future is something we should consider, I think, as well. Okay, well, I'm sorry, Shelby, yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just have one quick comment to add to this as well. I think having a central database for museums and federal agencies to be able to go to as well, to determine who the museum should be consulting with in terms of tribes, I think is really important as well. Because sometimes when we go to like the Bureau of Indian Affairs is kind of the go-to place, usually to try to find the contacts for different tribes, and sometimes that database is not up to date either. So I think I would support also having something in place that would also be of assistance to museums and federal agencies. So I agree with Tim and everyone else that I would like to see this stay in this document and consider putting something into our report to Congress this year as far as one of the barriers for implementing NAGPRA. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Shelby. Well, I'm going to suggest something a little different. Why don't we leave it as a topic that we want to include in our general comments, but can perhaps, based upon this conversation and some of the points that were being made, would you be willing to go back and look at another draft, or take another draft edit that would maybe incorporate some of the concerns and provide a statement that there is the need. Here's where we recognize the need is coming from, and we'll continue to include it as one of the general recommendations we want to make. but it might benefit from a little editing, wordsmithing that incorporates some of the concerns that were also addressed about communication.
I'd be happy to go back and wordsmith this. I see this draft as a living document until we get through it, until the end that where edits can be provided.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Looking then at number 4. This again, Anna, this is something that you had recommended. Is this the sort of thing we want to build or incorporate into the tribal consultation recommendation that we've already agreed to? Maybe highlight this aspect of tribal consultation.
Sorry, Frank, are you looking for my comments on this? Yeah, I suggested this because our Indigenous spiritual and ceremonial leaders have been an integral part of creating NAGPRA and also repatriations. It's also important because NAGPRA incorporates the participation and viewpoints of Native American religious leaders throughout the law. And I think this is an important provision that was originally incorporated in the law in order to be inclusive of their authority. Thank you.
Yes, and I agree with that. I guess my initial suggestion was, can we take this particular recommendation and incorporate it with the recommendation that we've made about tribal consultation as part of that recommendation, as opposed to a standalone recommendation. Does anybody want to comment on that possibility?
Hi, Frank, this is John.
Yeah, John, please. Yes, go ahead.
Are you suggesting to include that in the request or recommend the second recommendation?
Yes, I wondered if that would be an effective way of getting that request. And since it's mentioned as part of consultation.
And somehow include that to say that to allow adequate time or adequate consideration for, and then for
Something
along those lines.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Just as a suggestion, if we do come up with a series of requests, we want to make sure that they're presented in the most effective manner, and in a list that just doesn't go on at unnecessary length. If we can accommodate things being grouped together, that would be a sensible way to approach it. So that's all. I'm just suggesting that kind of thing. And I think by putting this under the umbrella of further consultation actions by the department, that might also strengthen it as something that will be looked at seriously. Any comments? Barnaby?
Yes, Barnaby.
Yes, go ahead,
I had a
Barnaby,
question
please.
about the recommendation or the request, more or less requiring Department of Interior to specifically identify spiritual and ceremonial leaders for consultation, because it would seem that tribe that consult on NAGPRA would automatically do that without necessarily identifying a particular person that that the tribal community recognizes as a spiritual ceremonial leader to consult. And sometimes some tribes are so small they don't have a particular person that they recognize in that way. They wouldn't be able to really consult with any particular tribal member that is not recognized by their community to do these activities and be overseeing ceremonial, spiritual, religious gatherings or activities. So I don't see that really has would be anything significant to make the Department of Interior do this.
Thank you. Thanks, Barnaby. So would you say it would be difficult and maybe not very effective for the department to try to identify these individuals, but that within the tribe, it's more apparent who the traditional and spiritual leaders are?
Yes, that the tribes themselves would be the ones that can identify and acknowledge their presence in their community.
So would it work? Do you think it might work then if something about, using the text that Honors put together here in some fashion and integrating it into what's now request number 2, that talks about the broader consultation with tribes, tribal organizations, and some, within that paragraph, within that request text, incorporate maybe special attention. We recommend that in particular tribes consider traditional and religious leaders to participate in the consultation, something along those lines. Honor, how
Yes,
something like, go ahead, Barnaby, sorry.
That sounds okay. Do it that way.
Okay, great. Thank you. Honor, what do you think?
Hi, yeah, I think it's important to have these consultations with tribes, but also to provide opportunities for consultation with spiritual leaders within tribes. And, there's a great number of tribes throughout this country, and certainly one tribe's approach to things may not be another tribe's approach to things, which is something we have to take into consideration. But I still think an opportunity to hear these viewpoints is important for the Secretary of the Interior, as well as for us as a review committee to advocate for. Thanks.
Tim, yes, go ahead.
I couldn't find my copy of the tribal leaders letter. Melanie, do you know if that letter actually asked for consultation with traditional religious leaders?
I don't recall that it whether it did or did not. I can find a copy of it.
Yeah, that'd be good to know. Clearly, I think traditional religious leaders should have been consulted on this. Whether it was requested of the tribal leaders to identify them and have them participate or not, I don't know. But that letter will let us know whether that was part of the request, because traditional religious leaders have a special role within the statute. So I think they should have been involved, whether the request included them or not.
Thank you, Tim.
Hi, this is John. I don't know.
John, yes, please.
In my hand.
Go ahead.
I guess I kind of certainly understand where the importance of this, but I guess it goes back to, my question goes back to Barnaby's comments and questions, is with this recommendation or request, is it on, is the responsibility on the department or the, whatever it is, the consulting agency to identify those traditional or spiritual leaders? Would they go directly to the tribes, or how would that, how might that work, I guess is my question, because I think one, you're directly going to the tribal leadership, or however the tribe operates. So I guess my question is, how, if someone was wanting to, how are they going to meet that? How would they meet that request or recommendation?
Mhm.
Obviously with the good intent of wanting to be inclusive and wanting to include the comments and recommendations from the spiritual leaders, but I guess on the operation, like how would they know who to go to? If I guess that's my question.
Mhm. Mhm. I think that is a good question. How would it actually become operational to do that? I suppose if it were a specific part of the formal consultation process with the tribal governments and the secretary's letters Tim brought up were to include a request that the tribal governments ensure that the tribe's traditional religious leaders are included in the consultation. That would be one way to get, to not just have the Department of Interior say who, or contact directly, try to contact directly traditional religious leaders, which would probably not be the most effective way to get involved with those people in the process.
Would that be it? I'm sorry, this is John again. Would that be a recommendation to the tribe to do that as a part of the process, or
well,
if I'm working with the tribe and I receive something like that, I'm just I know the full the full intent, the good intent is there, but would it be recommending that you include those or the religious leaders, or I mean, is that something that needs to be met? Is that going to be something that's going to be how that's going to be interpreted, I guess?
Right. Yes. I don't know the answer to that, but it would be one way of having the department, when it reaches out to tribes for the tribal consultation, I guess it would be a suggestion that the department, or it could be, a request that the department says, in particular, we'd like to hear from what the perspectives or viewpoints of traditional religious leaders, or something that way. I don't know that it can be a requirement, or a demand or something like that, but it certainly seems like it could be something that could be highlighted by the department in subsequent consultation activities, something like that. Shelby had her hand up, and now her picture has disappeared from my screen. But Shelby, do you have a comment? There you go. There you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to really address this. Working so much here in the Southwest, during consultations, we've had a number of traditional religious leaders and that come during the consultation process, and that is determined by the tribes and pueblos, and many of the pueblos here are very secretive as well and don't really want a lot of access to their ceremonial leaders and religious leaders. So I think it's really something that's going to be tribal specific in terms of how much their tribal traditional leaders and ceremonial leaders would be involved in some of the consultations. I know with one pueblo here, all the consultation is done with ceremonial leaders, and so I think a lot of it really depends on the tribes. But I do see maybe something where we can word it where, you know, we certainly are very interested in hearing from spiritual and ceremonial leaders from the tribes. Maybe the department could include something along that line in their letters that they send out for consultation. I'm not sure, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Shelby. Tim, you have a comment. Go ahead.
Thanks, Melanie, for posting that letter in the chat. In a quick read through it, I don't think the department did ask specifically for tribal religious leaders to comment or be involved in the consultation. I would see this as simply a line that would go in the letter that would alert the tribal leaders that under NAGPRA, and I think from our perspective, we need to hear from tribal religious leaders if they choose to talk to us. It's obviously the tribe and the religious leaders' choice whether they choose to do that. But I think we need to be explicitly open to that and to include it every time, not just in consultation on this, but on anything we do, because they have a role in implementation of this statute that is explicit in the statutory text.
All right. Barnaby, do you have anything else you'd like to add to this particular point?
I didn't understand the question. Anything I should ask? It's, I just don't believe that it's necessary to have that language in there, since the tribal representatives that are delegated responsibility to consult on all matters related to NAGPRA. These tribal members that have that responsibility will do that anyway, without having to be directed by the Department of the Interior. I don't see here again that it's really a need for make that statement or make that request.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Barnaby, I think what I hear you saying is you think that the tribes will, where it's appropriate, the tribes will do that in any case, and that it's their prerogative to do that, as opposed to Interior telling them that they need to do that. What about this as a kind of a compromise here? Because we've all recognized that this is an important point. If we have the second request about extending tribal consultation, what if maybe if Honor would be willing to do this again, if she were to take what's now a separate recommendation, or request number 4, and try to incorporate that perspective into number 2 as part of that particular request, so that we highlight it as something that we think is important for, particularly for consultations regarding NAGPRA with the tribe, but it's not the secretary telling the tribe how to do it, or imposing some kind of requirement. It's more to say for this particular topic in our consultation, we are interested in particular in what youth, in the people you regard as your traditional leaders, what their perspective is on it. That way we get the point, we get a point across in the recommendation. And I think we've agreed that having the department go out and try to create a list of traditional tribal leaders that it would consult with on this particular thing is not a good idea. It's not something we would recommend.
Hi, Frank, thanks. Yeah, I can look at the language and propose something by our next meeting.
Okay.
It might also be worthwhile to reiterate to the folks on this call and throughout other calls that we want to hear from them about their thoughts about these recommendations. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Sonner. Thanks, Sonner, for doing that. Okay, number 5. As I read through number 5, it occurs to me that, like we've talked about, or I've talked about at least in some of the other recommendations, that this one might be incorporated into the we need more time request that is number 1 right now, and not in its entirety, but it really, I think, gets at the same problem in terms of coming up with what's going to be required to implement whatever new regulations the department decides to go forward with. And I'd be willing to take a shot at that if others agree that that might be a way of reducing the number of requests by 1 by incorporating it into another. And just this is an example of why we need more time, because we need to get some information that we don't currently have. And we're looking for it, but we don't have it yet. I see a nod from Shelby. John or Tim got a thumbs up. Honor, John. Go ahead, John.
Yes, I think that's a good suggestion. There's a lot. It seems that this number 5 has a lot of there are a number of moving parts to it, right? I mean, there's one about hearing the comments from particularly there's a lot about hearing from the museum community, and then it moves into this funding mechanism. So it sounds like there are 2 parts to that. I mean, I know we've received the letter from AAM about at least their initial comments about that. But I mean, and we certainly appreciate that. But there weren't, but to me, there were, I mean, specific points in there, that address certain parts of the proposed regulations. And while we haven't heard directly from in public comment from, say, AAM or other museum communities that presumably have some ideas, I'm assuming, about the proposed regulations there, since given the length of time that they've been out. So I think it could be beneficial to hear some specifics on that, given we've heard some specifics, probably not from the tribal organizations and tribal nations and tribal communities who've either participated in the public comment, some of those meetings over the last summer and fall, and those who made comments during the review committee meetings. And that's given us, I think, perhaps not as much as we would have hoped, but it gives us some insight into what the tribal communities are thinking. We've not heard too much from the museum communities, and I know I sent, if we've referenced sort of an email that I'd sent you about some of that yesterday or last night. I guess I'd be interested to hear, or I think perhaps others would be interested to hear what some of the thinking is on how these regulations are going to impact particularly the museum communities, especially given that we're 30 plus years into NAGPRA and the repatriation process. Are the proposed regulations, to what degree or to what extent are they anticipating that it's going to create a certain need or urgency, and is this new perhaps whatever it is, the new responsibilities or the need for extra funding? I mean, are you looking at perhaps and it's probably a discussion later on down the line, but certainly the process where the regulations are looking at or taking a focus on the moving things forward with the CUIs, and is the thought process, is a thought process there that's going to require more funding. But the flip side of that is that you're going to have others who certainly think that those processes should have been moving along well before right now.
Okay, thank you, John. Yes, that will be. I'm sure we'll hear things like that. Barnaby, do you have any final comments on this particular request and the idea of trying to incorporate it into the first request we drafted?
No, I don't have any further comment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we will. I will attempt to incorporate this number 5 into the number 1 with and reduce the size of it as well. Yes,
Honor
Madam
has her hand raised.
Oh, Honor, sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Shelby. I agree with John, and I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity here. Right in the beginning of his comments, he mentioned that there were a couple of issues here, I believe, and one of them was needing to hear from representatives of the museum and scientific communities and federal agencies, and the other was a funding issue. If the recommendation is to make an additional point where these are broken up into 2 separate points, I'm in agreement with that. I think I agree that funding is going to be needed, not only for the museums and agencies, but also for the tribes. So I think we could maybe highlight that a little bit more poignantly and make that actually 2 recommendations here.
Okay,
Thanks.
that's a good point. Thank you. Did Shelby have a comment also? I can't see. Honor,
No, I did not have my
Oh,
hand
okay.
raised or have a comment, but I totally agree with Honor in splitting these 2 up and having them as 2 separate sections. 'Cause
Okay.
funding, I think, is going to be a huge part of this, not just for museums, but for tribes as well. So it's going to be a big financial burden on both. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if it's okay, I will try to do both of those things then, and and bring up the expectation that we see that additional funds will be needed to make things work better, which is something that the committee itself has been saying for at least as long as I've been on it, and prior to that for some years. I think that more funding was needed in recommendations to Congress. Madam DFO, how tied to the 4:30 time slot for the request are we? We need to. Can we continue with this conversation, or do we want to?
We can continue this conversation, and I will have Lisa check in, or we could break here and then come back for the presentation at 4:30 in 10 minutes, 12 minutes.
Okay. Why don't we try to deal with recommendation number 6? It might be that this is another one that we want to incorporate into one that we've already got out there. and then try to get that resolved, and then take a very short break. And then if the presenters are ready, we can go forward with that. Okay. So number 6. Again, this is another reason why more time is needed for review in order to make whatever the department puts forward as a formally proposed set of regulations is the best possible thing that can be done. It could be used as another example in recommendation or request, rather, number 1, if it didn't have to be a standalone. Hunter, I think this actually incorporates a couple things. I think you were the one who suggested it specifically, but I'm not actually completely sure that it might be that it's a combination of a general comment I made and a general comment you made at the last meeting. Do you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, sure, Frank. It is a combination of the last iteration of this draft. My suggestion had been that the review committee recommends that these changes be carefully reviewed and for federal agencies to investigate the overlap and effect of changes or impacts on federal laws such as ARPA, NHPA, and NEPA. And I had brought up in particular ARPA Indian lands and ARPA public lands.
Right.
My concern, I did not have a concern with geographic affiliation at this time.
Okay. All right. John, you have a comment?
Yes, I would support having this being a standalone recommendation. I just think that the very fact that we've had significant discussion about a few of the terms. I think at our last meeting, we talked about duty of care. We went on about that for quite some time. And it seems that there's in terms of the new new definition or new term, that it's not really, I won't say it's really new, but I guess its application, the geographic affiliation is certainly, well, we haven't got to further down in our discussion about that yet. I mean, there are certainly some tribal communities and tribal nations who are supportive of that. There are some tribal nations who have their rightful misgivings about that. And particularly that particular term, as it certainly it already appears in places within within the NAGPRA documents or process, and it seems like there's a bigger discussion on even say something like that in terms of, because it looks to address the CUI process and even I guess even some of the languaging that's in there about unassociated funerary objects and things of that nature that are built into the legislation and the regulations, and trying to figure out some process or something that tribes are having difficulties with working with perhaps museums or universities and institutions on navigating that. I mean, there heard some comments about that in 1011, and so there's even for that definition there. I mean, we can see that there's there's lots of discussion still and perhaps debate to still be had on something like that. So I would support that recommendation 6 be standalone. But I think it's very important that that we hear all parties and all sides as the regulation review process moves forward, not just for the review committee, but everyone involved.
Okay. All right. Thank you, John. Thank you. And Honor as well. Any other comments on this one? Barnaby, I still can't see you. I see you a phone icon where I know you are. Did you have any comments you want to make on this one?
Yeah, I'm not certain I understand what you're referring to, and federal agencies to investigate overlap? What do they mean by overlap?
Honor, do you want to spell that out a little bit?
Hi, sure. Hi, Barnaby. NAGPRA, provisions of NAGPRA and the agencies often have to coordinate with aspects of NAGPRA having to do with the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, NHPA, and NEPA in consultation processes. So I think it's important to more fully understand any kinds of effects changes in NAGPRA may have on these laws and that coordination.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, I tell you what, let's just say we'll keep that. We may come back to it. I'm sure we're going to be going over these again at some point in the future, but we'll leave that one there. And we may, as John, I think, suggested, we may cover some, we will cover some of these when we talk more specifically about individual definitions, so that we may actually take care of it from there. Tim, yes, before we move on, go ahead.
Just one suggestion on that. I suspect that that list of terms will grow as we go through the document. But the one that I would like to add to that one is the elimination of the term possession.
Okay. Okay. Well, why don't we, when we're going to be doing another draft of this, why don't we'll get it in there, put it in there. Thank you. I remember your exchange with Stephen about that. So I figured that was going to be coming up at some point. Madam DFO, my clock says 2:27, but your clock says 4:27. So you want to take, what do we usually take? 10 minutes or 5 minutes or?
Why don't we do 10 minutes? It'll give me a little extra time to make sure everybody is online
Okay.
and ready.
All
So
right. If it's okay then with the other members, why don't we take a 10-minute break? We'll come back and we'll do the, we'll talk about the request from the University of Colorado Museum, and then hopefully get back to this document following that. And then I know we've got a couple of other things as well that we wanted to talk about with new business or old business. So 10-minute break. Madam DFO is going to start her timer. Thank you.
Hello?
hello.
Oh, good. This is Sheila.
Hi, Sheila. You should be able to turn on video too if you want.
Okey doke.
There you are.
Are you able to get Sam and Christy?
Yeah, so Sam should be able to unmute and turn on video, and I think I lost Christy. Let me try again.
Yeah, we've been having all kinds of crazy things here with our laptops. And I know Shelley Thompson has logged in as well.
Okay, I didn't have Shelley on my list. Do you want me to bring her in too?
Yeah. And she may be, let's see, I forwarded my email from you guys to her. And she said she's been listening.
What's her name again?
Shelley Thompson. But I wonder if it shows up as me.
Yeah, there, it actually is you, and I think I've let her, yes. Shelley, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Oh, hooray.
I had 2 Sheila Goffs, so that worked.
When I registered, no email came back to me.
Oh,
So I let Sheila know this morning.
okay. And Christy, you should be in. There you are. I don't see Cassandra.
Now, Cassandra is out on sick leave.
Okay,
And Shelley is her supervisor, and we're so grateful that she's jumping on here at the last minute to help us out.
okay, great. And Terry, should I bring Terry in too?
Terry was going to call, and I have been calling him repeatedly. I don't know if he's gonna be here or not. I'm not
That's
sure
fine.
what's going on.
Okay,
His name is on the attendee list.
yeah.
Try bringing.
Is
him.
it?
Mhm.
Oh, good, then let him in. Maybe that's why he's not answering his phone.
Okay, I'll keep trying. I'm gonna just step away for a minute, but
Sure.
I'll be right back. You feel free to turn off your videos now that you've checked and it's working.
I'm afraid to touch anything.
Sheila,
Yes,
I can go ahead and mute your line just while we're waiting if you want.
well, I can go ahead and do it too. I'll do it. I go down to the very, very bottom. Melanie? So
Yeah,
Terry's on the phone now, and he's unsure if you are able to hear him.
is he calling in?
He's actually at his computer.
Okay. Hang on just a second. Let me see. I've asked him to unmute.
All right, yeah, Melanie is saying you have to do something on your end to unmute.
Okay,
There you are,
I hear
Terry.
you.
can you hear me now?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, I'm hanging up my phone. Talk to you soon.
Okay, so I can go ahead and hang up and just talk to the computer.
Yes,
Okay, then, good, good.
all righty.
All right,
Bye-bye.
all right, bye.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're ready to begin. The next item on the agenda is a disposition request from the University of Colorado Boulder. And Samantha, I think I'm turning it over to you to start off the presentation.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of the committee for allowing us to present our disposition request today and for being so flexible with the agenda to accommodate all of our speakers today. We greatly appreciate it. Before I begin, I wanted to acknowledge that we are at the University of Colorado Boulder, and that sits upon land within the territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. And 48 contemporary tribal nations are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. Next slide, thank you. My name is Dr. Samantha Flad. I'm the Curator of Archaeology at the Museum of Natural History and an Assistant Professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Colorado Boulder. Before I begin, I would like to very sincerely apologize for the situation that we find ourselves presenting on today. It is an unfortunate circumstance that we are hoping to rectify as quickly as we can. I am joined today by Christina Kane, our Anthropology Collections Manager, Sheila Goff, who is with Special Projects at our museum, and we are very, very grateful to have two representatives from the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe to provide their comments at the end of our presentation. We are joined by Shelley Thompson, the Director of the Southern Ute Cultural Preservation Department, and Terry Nate Sr., the TIPO for the Ute Mountain Tribe. To give you a brief history of our work with NAGPRA, the University of Colorado Museum, referred to here as UCM, has been proactive in NAGPRA compliance and to date has consulted with 221 tribes. The UCM has repatriated 653 ancestors, 635 associated funerary objects, 109 unassociated, and 14 items, both sacred and of cultural patrimony. The UCM has transferred these ancestors and items to the appropriate tribes, and when asked to do so, has collaborated with tribes for their reburial. And I'm going to pass the presentation off to Christy, our collections manager, to share more about this circumstance.
Thank you, Sam. I'm going to give you a little overview of the current disposition request. Early in 2019, the Anthropology Department of the university notified the UCM of the finding of possible Native American human remains in a storage room in their building, located when other materials were being removed and relocated. Sheila and I responded and examined the contents of the boxes and concurred that associated field numbers and catalog numbers, as well as the presence of items like beads, suggested the possibility of Native American ancestors. The boxes were transferred to the UCM for inventory, and subsequently, in the fall of 2019, they were temporarily transferred to the Metropolitan State University Human Identification Lab for non-destructive osteological analysis to determine Native American ancestry. There was no documentation in the boxes for the ancestors listed on the provided inventory to identify where they originated or when or how they came into the possession of the anthropology department. Some had numbers, but after extensive research of museum records, the numbers could not be associated with any known sites. Dr. Christine Pink, formerly director of the Human Identification Lab, is an expert in identification of Native American human remains. She has conducted analysis for the state of Colorado and numerous institutions and law enforcement agencies. Dr. Pink provided her findings to the UCM in the spring of 2020. The delay was due to the pandemic, Dr. Pink taking a new job and moving out of state, and Dr. Pink handling some personal issues. She determined that 133 sets of the remains, more likely than not, are Native American ancestors based on certain physical characteristics and/or taphonomy consistent with archaeological remains. You have her summary statement in your materials as it pertains to this presentation. Specifically, 12 of the 133 ancestors were identified unequivocally as Native American due to the analysis, the accession numbers, leading to documentation of where, how, and when they were removed, and identification of 7 associated funerary objects. Consultation for these ancestors and funerary objects has taken place, cultural affiliation has been determined, and a notice of inventory completion has been published in the National and the Federal Register. 121 sets of ancestors were identified as archaeological. Most of these individuals are represented by 1 to 2 skeletal elements, and no documentation as to identification or provenience could be found. These ancestors are the subject of this disposition request. The UCM concludes that they are more likely than not Native American. This conclusion is supported by the fact that historically, the UCM and the Anthropology Department primarily collected archaeological Native American human ancestors from Colorado and the Southwest prior to NAGPRA, as well as the osteological evidence provided by Dr. Pink. 23 skeletal elements were identified as not Native American based on labels, provenience information associated with catalog numbers and/or taphonomy. There were additional research efforts made as well. The UCM had previously dispositioned and transferred our CUI with no known geographical location. We asked the National NAGPRA program how to handle this new case, and we're told to follow the regulations for a new collection under 43 CFR 10.13, future applicability. So that is how we proceeded. We tried to find out who placed the boxes in storage from the Anthropology Department and when. We expect that some, but not all of the ancestors originated from the museum. We speculate that this transfer took place 30 or possibly more years ago. However, we have no evidence to verify this. The anthropology department contacted retired faculty who would have been in the department at the time, but learned nothing new. Likewise, the UCM contacted 2 previous curators and collections managers who had no knowledge of the ancestors being removed from the museum and taken to the anthropology department. I'm now going to pass it over to Sheila for discussion of the consultations.
Thank you, Christy. To begin with, I want to remind folks that Ute Mountain Ute Tribe and Southern Ute Indian Tribe have been very active in repatriation efforts in Colorado and have often taken the lead in disposition of culturally unidentifiable Native American ancestors for the state and for numerous museums and agencies in the state. The Ute Indian Tribe, removed from Colorado, often participates or supports their efforts. I first reached out to the Ute tribes in late 2020 to see if they would be interested in taking the lead here. Ute Mountain Ute and Southern Ute agreed with Ute Indian Tribe's support should no other tribe come forward. I then contacted the 45 additional tribes with ancestral ties to Colorado to invite them to consult. The rationale for this was that while it is not possible to know the origin of these ancestors, they have been on campus in Colorado for at least 30 years, if not more. Consultations primarily occurred between March 22nd and July 7th via telephone or Zoom. 32 tribes participated, all in support of the culturally unidentifiable determination, with the lead and disposition to the Colorado Ute tribes. They expressed gratitude to the Utes and preferences to move forward toward respectful reburial as soon as possible. 16 tribes chose not to participate. None of those objected to the proposed disposition when asked. Evidence of consultation and support are provided in your materials. I would like to clarify and correct one thing in the draft notice of inventory completion that we submitted. We are specifically requesting authorization to disposition and transfer these remains to the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. The UCM will collaborate with the 2 Colorado Ute tribes to obtain an acceptable reburial location and funding for reburial. During consultation, several tribes requested to attend reburial and their wishes will be honored. At this time, I'd like to ask our 2 representatives from Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Ute for comment. Shelley, would you care to go first, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Repatriation of ancestors and cultural items under NAGPRA has been a priority for the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. The situation that has happened at the University of Colorado Boulder is upsetting to tribes as well as the museum. However, we understand that Dr. Flad, Ms. King, Ms. Goff have worked hard to resolve it in a manner that is respectful of the ancestors. We appreciate their efforts to consult with the tribes who have ancestral ties to Colorado. Southern Ute Indian Tribe has continuously stood ready to assist in repatriation and appreciates the support of those tribes in our accepting disposition of the ancestors along with the Ute Mountain Ute.
Thank you, Shelley. Terry, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Terry Knight, Senior. I'm the Tribal Historical Preservation Officer for Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. Is the rest of the NAGPRA committee there? Can they hear me? Or is it just us talking?
We can hear you, Terry. This is Honor Keeler.
Okay, well, I just want to say that I've been involved in NAGPRA situations since 1978. And, you know, we had a difficult time before NAGPRA law was passed. Even after that, some of the federal departments here in the state of Colorado did not want to comply with the law or the regulation. But we keep telling them, follow the law, follow the law. Eventually, they got to it. They were doing that. And I don't know how other states handle these kinds of situations. But here in Colorado, you know that whenever they find a inadvertent find of a human, the bones or whatever remains, you know, that the coroner comes in, the legal person comes in, and then what they do is they call the History Colorado, and from there it's determine, you know, who it is, what it is, and then they'll call me and say, we have this individual here. Do you have time to do a reinternment? We're going to start the process now, and maybe 2 or 3 months later, whatever, it all gets done. Like I said, I don't know about other states, and also here in Colorado, we had difficulty with state land and private lands where individuals were found. And we had some real problems with that. Eventually, we established what we call the state process, and that's how we followed that process to eventually reintern those individuals. And that wasn't too much of a problem, but it was still a problem. And we have those to work with, and people today are very, very cooperative in doing those things. So I see and I listen to some of the this meeting here and talk about the recommendations, the comment period, and tribal consultation. I don't know, like I said, I don't know much about other tribes, other states, how they do this. But here, you know, there's only 2 Ute tribes in the state of Colorado. And there was initially 3 of us that took care of all these reinternments. And we're all Ute. Our oldest, older brother's name was Clifford Duncan, but he was from the Northern Ute tribe. And my other older brother, Alden Ronaho Jr., and both of those individuals have passed on, which leaves only me. And, you know, we have a system, a process that we follow in doing these reinternments. And we've been fortunate that some of the other tribes that have come through here, they will refer to us to take care of these things. And so I'm looking at this, what you all talked about some of these things, and I think was number 4, and talking to the spiritual people and people that the religious leaders and whatever. My experience says those religious leaders, spiritual people, and those, most of them are older people, and most of them don't understand why we have so much different problems in trying to reinter somebody, you know, that we're supposed to do. And we've got all kinds of laws, regulations, and this and that. And I see even more now. And it brings back to my mind what my elders told me. They said, brother, don't get into anything, and don't talk about things that you do not know about. If you don't know about these things, don't say anything, because you have no experience. You do not know what you're talking about. Did you hear me? And I don't know how many of you people have actually gone through this whole system that eventually comes up to where we do the reinternment of these individuals here in the state of Colorado, also in southeast Utah. But yet, you sit there like anybody else, whether you're native or non-native, and you write regulations brought up by somebody, by you, as to how this should proceed when you never have been there. That's what bothers me. if you were there next to me and you're doing this and you're doing that, I say, yes, this individual knows what they're talking about because they've been there, they've done this. But if you haven't, then you're somebody is sitting there saying, well, we should do this, we should do that. I don't agree with that. That's where some of the problems is. What you think should be done, what you think the tribe should do, what you think the tribe should tell the spiritual people, the religious people, how to do these things. I don't think that's supposed to be the way it is supposed to be. It should be, I think you got it upside down or backwards, you know, because my elder said, you know, you find somebody that's you know, identified person, whatever, go through this and go through that. But the bottom line is get that person back in the ground. Get that person back in the ground. And that's what I say. And I tell people, yes, I am the bottom line. I will put them in the ground. But we've been fortunate that people that we worked with have gone through the system, have done this and done that. So we can put those people back in the ground. But I don't know how this new proposed addition regulation is going to improve that. That's why I say if somebody else is saying, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. Maybe it's just me, maybe it's just me in the state of Colorado. I think we have a good handle on that. That's why I said, I don't know how other states are doing. I don't know what other tribes doing, how they do it. I know a little bit, but you know, that should not apply to everybody, especially when we're all working together and taking care of this, and we come to realize and understand what we have to do, and we're doing that. So I don't understand why you all need, and me telling me, well, you got to have this, you got to have that. When this regulation needs to be improved, I don't like it. And the last thing I'm going to say is, many years ago, I put in an application to be part of that, the National NAGPRA Review Board, and I was denied. They said I didn't qualify. And I said, okay, all right, I've been doing this since 1978. I don't know where I didn't qualify. Maybe I didn't know how to talk, or maybe I don't know how to do the regulation, whatever, but I sure know how to put those people back in the ground. So just letting you know that. So, you know, I'm thinking about it, talking about it, and I don't know how that's all going to fit into what you're talking about, those recommendations. So I could say more, but I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
Terry and Shelley, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today in this presentation and share your thoughts. Once again, we regret that this situation has occurred, and particularly to Shelley and Terry and the other affected tribes. We are deeply sorry for the current circumstance, but we thank you all for your time, and we are ready for any questions or comments that you may have.
Any of the review committee members have a comment or a question? Well, I have one, maybe a few, about the physical anthropological analysis. I was initially confused in the documentation that you sent that there were that Dr. Pink was identified in a letter she sent about the examination, the osteological examination that she did. And then there was another reference to and she's at Western Michigan now. And there's another reference to a physical anthropologist at the Metropolitan university, and didn't identify her by name, but now I understand that that was Dr. Pink when she was there. So that's the examination she's talking about in her letter, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. It sounds from the brief description in the letter that it was, very thorough and non-destructive examination of the remains. Is there a full report on the different individuals that she examined or that she identified in this collection?
She described some of the individuals at length, and others are part of an inventory list in which she has described, I hate to speak so clinically, but the skeletal element, the approximate age, was it an adult, was it a child, and any kind of other conditions that she wanted to note. So there's two kinds of reports, I guess you could say.
Okay. And the museum has a copy of those reports, so you have that for your
Yes.
accounting purposes and historical.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
Excuse me, can you hear me? I was contract coordinator for the Animas La Plata Water Project, and I was over all the archaeological work. And there was, I believe there were 6 different sites, villages, and the archaeologist said, we want to see if they were all one or where they were from. So we said, okay, all right, but we only let you do that. What is that? Where they take a sample of your enamel, tooth enamel, and we did that. I supported that, and come to find out, I think it was 5 out of the 6 or whatever, those people were not originally from that that project area, what we call green belt area, or what we call in youth Sawa tickets, that they were not all one people. And I said, huh. So, that's the only kind of scientific analysis that we let them do. But other than that, DNA, whatever, we said no, just that part on that tooth enamel. So I don't know if other tribes do that, if they like that, but, we wanted to know because there were so many of them. So many of them. So I can't remember how many of those people, had been processed. And so, I don't know what the other tribes said, would have said, or if they would allow that or not, but we did. And we found out that they were not all one people. So just some information.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knight. That is an interesting finding. Tim, you have a comment or a question?
I think a question. I recall a number of years ago, after extensive consultation, the state of Colorado negotiated a protocol for the disposition of some culturally unidentifiable Native American human remains that was approved by the Department of the Interior.
Yes.
Can you tell me if that agreement is still in place? And if so, how it relates to the current request?
Some of you know I'm retired from History Colorado. And yes, that protocol is still in place because we believe that the individuals that we're speaking of today were probably in the possession of the university prior to that, even prior to NAGPRA, prior to that protocol. It is basically our the University of Colorado's responsibility to take care of them. And I will add that the state process is for inadvertent discoveries on state and private lands. And since we do not have geographic origin for these, again, it is was felt that it is our responsibility to take care of them.
Thanks. Would it be possible, Sheila, to provide the committee with a copy of that protocol that we can put in the meeting folder?
Sure, I can get
Thank
that to you.
I believe there's a copy on the state's website. I'll try to find the link and post it in the.
Yeah, there definitely is.
But again, just to clarify, although Sheila used to work for the state, the protocol is a state protocol for the state offices. And today, what's here before you is the University of Colorado Boulder's request.
Thanks, Melanie.
Yeah, that was, I was involved in that, and I think I remember you, Timothy, way back then, and it's good you're still involved in this, and it's good to shed new light on the old situation of what had been done by who and where, when. But I just wanted to point out also, through that whole system, either this NAGPRA or through the state process, our tribal chairmen were always there supporting us, supporting this thing. The tribal chairman, both of the Ute Mountain and Southern Ute, were right there supporting us. And I don't see that anywhere anymore. So we're talking about, getting this this addition, this new, what you were talking about earlier that I was reading it. That's why I said, I don't know how these people are. But then we had that. That's why, this process and everything went through, and we're still using it today. And I'm gonna just tell you one example that really came to light. We did a reburial under the state process east of Fort Collins. When me and Mark Tobias got there, those people were all dressed like they're going to church on Sunday. There was a family, can't remember how many of them, how many men and women. They were all dressed, coat and tie, nice dress. They were dressed nice. And me and Mark looked at each other and said, what's going on here? Are we in the wrong place? Maybe somebody's getting married. And we walked over there and they were dressed like that for the reburial on their property. And I said, wow, that's how far it got. That's how far this and how much these people respected what was going on. And I don't hear about that any place, anywhere. So Colorado, we're doing okay. If them people can do that, respect it like that, we are doing all right. So, but just a few things that you all talked about just a while ago. So I just want to say that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story, Mr. Knapp. That is interesting.
It's nice to hear from you, Terry.
Yeah.
And Melanie, thanks for posting that. Could you make sure that a copy of that is put in the folder in the meeting procedures so that people, when they read the transcripts, can go see that?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Honor, you have a comment or a question?
Sure. I was just wondering if someone, maybe Terry, could speak about the broad scale report or support for this repatriation across the tribes.
The what?
The support for the repatriation across many tribes.
I don't know. I haven't really got into those kinds of things with the state or federal departments, and really what has been done, what has transpired in part of regulations and other things. But I think maybe Sheila might know more about it than me.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Sheila?
So Honor, I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you referring to the fact that we have support from 32 tribes?
Yes.
Yes, okay, got it.
Yes.
Well, I guess I have to go back to history. And as Terry said, Ute Mountain Ute and Southern Ute have been very active over the years, and they're well known amongst the tribes that have ancestral ties to the state of Colorado. So that it was almost without question, each tribe I spoke to that offered to provide support, it was
And
problem at all. They were
whenever
incredibly grateful.
this comes up to the tribe, let's say the chairman's office, automatically he'll say, talk to Mr. Knight, he's the TIPO and he's the one that takes care of these things. And so that's how it is routed out to me in my office. And I think the other tribes were doing the same thing. And we always have History Colorado right in there, keeping things moving. So, you know, we all work together on this. We don't say, I don't know who, what, whatever. We all work together on this and we get these people reinterred. That's a main object. Main thing to do is get these people reinterred. So, and we were told that by our elders, you have to do this. You have to. They didn't say, well, maybe you can do this one. They said, you have to do this. And that's what we follow.
No, thank you, Terry, and thank you, Sheila. Mr. Chair, does the committee have any additional questions, or do you think we're ready for to pass a resolution here?
It seems like we have asked all the questions and made all the comments we intend to. I'll give anybody on the committee one more chance to do so. Otherwise, I think we do move forward as you suggest, Honor. Okay, Madam DFO, we do a vote to recommend this disposition go forward to the for the secretary to make a recommendation to the museum.
Yes, I think that the form would be that the review committee recommends the disposition according to the request from the University of Colorado. The recommendation to the secretary.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
For the disposition according to the request.
Are there, well, we could just do a vote, just do a show of hands actually, because we can see each other now. So all those in favor of such a recommendation to the secretary?
Unfortunately, that won't show on the transcript, but I can say that there is a unanimous agreement.
Yes.
I would just call and make sure there are no objections to this recommendation from the committee. Okay, so we will record this as a unanimous recommendation by the committee for the disposition according to the request.
Yes. So I think it's then probably appropriate to thank the presenters today, and we appreciate the information, both the written information that you sent and the thorough presentation with the background on this particular matter. And to all of you, thanks very much, and we hope this disposition will go smoothly now.
Thank you very much for your time and for accommodating us to come in the middle of your meeting.
Thank you so much.
That's one of the reasons we have these meetings. So
As a
welcome.
fellow Coloradan, I want to just thank you all for your presentation today, and just to say hello to Mr. Knight and Shelley Thompson as well. So thank you very much for coming today and doing this presentation.
Thank you, Shelby, for that special thanks.
Widow, thank you, everyone.
John?
Yes, I wanted to thank them for their presentation. I actually wanted to thank them for or commend them on how quickly they moved this process forward to reach a a positive outcome. So I want to once again thank them for their presentation and commend them on the work that they did to move this fairly quickly, all things considered.
Okay, Madam Chair, I guess with that, the presenters are free to stay at the meeting and listen to what we do next, or get about their business as they choose. Thank you again.
Yes.
The committee needs to stay at work. We have just about an hour left now, and I think we have time to get through the document that we were starting on beforehand, unless someone has an alternative that they want to propose. No, Madam DFO, is that sound like the appropriate approach?
Yes, I will just remind the committee that there were some issues of new business.
Yes.
That
We
the
need to
chair
leave. Yes.
wanted to address.
We definitely need to leave time for those. So it is what, 5:16 Eastern time. Now, if we take the next 30 minutes and try to go through the draft recommendations and then bring up the new business, if we can get done in less than 30 minutes on going through this document, which I think is possible, because I think the last two recommendations that we have are pretty straightforward, at least in terms of what the committee wants to recommend. We finished with recommendation, the draft recommendation number 6. We're looking at number 7 now. This is primarily a request, a formal request. We've made formal requests at various committee meetings in the past, well, at least the past year. Well, no, not the past year, but the past half a year, for updated versions of what the department might be considering as the revised text for the NAGPRA regulations. This recommendation or request repeats that, I think, is the primary thing. Does anybody have any comments on it? And do you think I've summarized it accurately? So actually, I guess probably it's proper to say we're asking for two things in this: any update to the July 2021 text that we have and we've been using for our questions and comments. Any update of that, we would appreciate getting from the department a version of that, so we could be more up to date, up to speed in what comments and recommendations we might make. And then there's a second document that the Associate Director Beasley of the Park Service mentioned at the Senate Indian Affairs Committee regarding written responses to the tribes based on the consultation that occurred, and we requested that document as well. So there's two documents that this recommendation or request addresses. We haven't received either of those, and that, Madam DFO, I think you could update us if that were the case. But if it's not, it seems like these requests, if we want to include them, are still relevant.
Just as a reminder that any materials that are provided to the review committee are public materials and would be provided publicly. So the decision here on the part of the department is not just whether or not to share this information with the committee, but also about making the information public.
Yes, I understand that. Any
And
comments?
and at this time, there has been no publication of either a revised draft regulatory text or of comments received during tribal consultation.
Thank you. John, you have a comment?
Yes, are we asking then for or requesting a summation of those comments or a full-on release of those, unedited release of those comments? One, I guess going back to if I think we had some discussion in one of our previous meetings that some tribes who had participated were and tribal nations were more open to that than others, and I guess there were some concerns that some of the information shared during those consultations, they weren't comfortable in having or ready at this time to have those released to the general public. And as the DFO has pointed out, the release of those documents or information would not just be available to the review committee, but to the wider public.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you. Tim, I think you specifically asked about the Park Service's response, or the department's response, I guess it would be, to the tribal comments, that document would be useful. Those documents, I guess it would be useful to the committee as we work our way through this review of the draft proposed regulations. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. I was just, I was listening to the Senate testimony that the Associate Director made, and that was the characterization she made to the senators. So I think that would be a useful document for us to have as well.
I presume, Madam DFO, maybe you could clarify this. If the Park Service provided that document to the Senate, it would become a public document as well. Or those documents, if they're individual responses to individual tribes, I don't actually know what form the responses will be in.
Yes, if material were provided to the Senate, it would become a part of the congressional record.
And do you have any update on the Associate Director's commitment to the Senate to share those documents?
I believe I would have to look specifically at her testimony, but I believe the statement was that when the regulations are published as proposed, the department will also be providing direct responses to tribal comments that it received during consultation.
Oh, I don't actually recall the condition being placed on it, but I may just have missed that. Tim, do you recall? Or anybody else who listened to that hearing?
Yeah, I don't think I recall that characterization as well, but obviously there's back and forth going on right now with follow-up questions between the Senate and all of the witnesses. So perhaps that'll be clarified in the follow-up questions.
Madam DFO, perhaps you could, for our next meeting, not immediately, fill us in a little bit more on what's going back and forth and how public it is, or when it will become public?
Well, right now I can pull up the testimony and I will try to identify the paragraph in which this is discussed for you. In addition, as Tim mentioned, there are what are called questions for the record that are shared, and all of the testimony, as well as additional input that was received, as well as responses to the questions for the record, will become a part of the material on this hearing and will become part of the public record.
Right. Okay. Thank you. John, you have a comment?
No comment. I guess I just left my hand up for my previous comment. Thank you, though.
Okay, no problem. Barnaby, do you have anything on this matter you want to discuss or comment on?
No comment.
Okay, thank you. Well, my suggestion on this particular request is that we retain it on our list of potential recommendations or requests that we would send forward. Hopefully, before that, we might actually see a revised draft that we could work from. Anybody have an alternative to that or want to change it at all at this point? Okay, well then let's move on to number 8. Madam DFO, if you could scroll down a little. This is actually another request for information, not specifically linked to the regulations. I think it's as we had discussed earlier. Honor, this was something that you had suggested. Again, my sense of this is that it's important information, and it would be useful to have. Is this the right context to enable us to actually get it, or have National NAGPRA have the resources to collect it and make it available?
Hi, Frank, thank you. I think this is a good context to bring this issue up. We, as a committee, have been trying to gain access to this information, or I've been asking for it in a number of committee meetings and have not been provided it. I think I've pretty much asked for this since the beginning of my tenure, which is quickly coming to a close here shortly in May, and nothing has been provided. And in the last review committee meeting, I again asked for it and was told that I could look at information from 2017. And I'm not sure what the issue is with the program or with the Department of the Interior, that they can't or aren't reporting on any of these failure to comply claims. But I think it's important information for us as a committee to have as we go through the regulations and discuss how these draft regulations have been changed, but also how they're functioning. If there are no prosecutions or no investigations happening, are we really, as a committee, supposed to not report this to Congress? So I think this is very important information, and I would hope that the National NAGPRA program would release it and bring it up to date to 2022 at this point. And I'd really like to see that information provided before I leave this committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Other comments from committee members? Madam DFO, do you want to offer any response to some Honor's points in terms of providing an update for the information?
I will just add that we have reported on the number of letters we receive every year, as well as the amount of penalties that have been collected every year. The more detailed information is not available more recently, but was last provided in 2017.
And where was the information provided to you from? Where did you get the information up to 2017?
It is our reporting, the National NAGPRA program's reporting on civil penalties.
So there hasn't been any new information since 2017?
No, we have reported annually on the number of allegations we've received, and we reported annually on the total amount of penalties that have been collected.
Okay, thank you. Tim, did you have a comment?
Sure. I think alls we're asking for is the total number of allegations received and the number that have not been investigated. I think that's the critical piece that we're missing here, that was available in the 2017 data, but is not available now. And that I know that the chairman of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs asked a very pointed question to Ms. Beasley about the backlog. And I think, I hope that the Park Service provides a clear and accurate response to the senator.
Okay, thank you. Well, how do we want to handle this? Does anybody have, John, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I have a follow-up comment to that, or thought would be that how much of that, how much of the requested information in point 8, at least up to 2017 or post 2017, I guess the question is how much of that has been looked at in the consideration and composition of the draft regulations. Was that considered at all to address any of that based on what was available in 2017 and going forward? Did that have an impact on the current drafting of the regulations or considerations in the draft?
Well, again, I can speak for the National NAGPRA program and our responsibility in drafting regulations. We considered all information that we have received in a variety of sources, but including certainly every single allegation that has been received by my office. And the issues represented in those allegations were a part of our consideration in drafting the regulations. So the answer is, and not just 2017, but any allegation we've received since then was certainly considered in our work to draft revised regulations that addressed issues under NAGPRA.
Thank you, Melanie.
So I guess the question that I have for everybody is, do we continue to have this number 8 as one of the recommendations or requests in this list that we're putting together? Does anyone object to having it? Okay, I guess we leave it and let's move on. Let's move on to 9 and 10. In both of these instances now, we're moving from a general comments to specific recommendations. And one having to do with the purpose section. We had debate and discussion about the purpose section last time when we were dealing with the longer February 11th document. The proposal here, instead of trying to wordsmith ourselves, is to go to the House report on the legislation that became NAGPRA and just use exactly what they said, or pretty much exactly what they said in terms of the purpose of the act. And that's what you see in front of you here under recommendation number 9. And likewise, we talked at our last meeting on the 14th of February about definition for duty of care, which is a new definition. And we've actually come up with one here based on that discussion. So do any of the committee members want to comment on either of these and say, you know, I object, or they look fine? John, your hand is still up. Okay. If there's no objection, I would say we just move forward with this, which isn't to say that this will be the language in the regulations, but at least we have some language that we're comfortable with recommending. I can't see Shelby or Barnaby. Do either of you have a comment on this, or do I take silence to indicate you agree with this approach, that we keep both of these as currently worded?
Sounds okay.
Okay, thanks, Barnaby. Shelby as well? Just go ahead and speak. I can't actually see you to see if you've got your hands up on this, the screen.
Sorry.
There you are. There you
Sorry, I was still
That's okay.
muted. Yeah, no, I'm fine with the way things are worded at this point. I might do a little wordsmithing on some things eventually, but for now I'm okay with where we're at.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you. Thank you all.
Just
Tim, yes. go
Frank, just one typo on the purpose. Instead of HR 101877, that should be House Report 101877.
Oh, okay. I thought that was what HR meant.
No, that's for the bill, and the House
okay.
Report is for the report.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim. I'm going to make a note. Okay. All right, then we've managed to get through. John?
Yes, just one brief comment. It says a standard of reasonable care. I don't have a suggestion immediately, but I wonder, without going too deep or going what reasonable care might entail, or what might be considered reasonable care.
Well, I think that's a good question. And I'm not sure we have an answer. But we can ask that of representatives of the museum community when we have a chance to do that. And I see Shelby nodding her head. I'm not quite sure what. Do you want to make a comment on that as well?
Yeah, this is a section I think I'm going to have some wordsmithing to do on this part. So, but I want to get into more of the definitions and some of those things before we come back to this, because I think some of that's going to probably influence maybe some of the wording on this.
Okay.
And it would be good to hear from the museum community. I've got my own thoughts on it, but I'd like to hear from more people from the museum.
Yes, yeah, that was my thinking as well, that we wanted to get some input there as well. So I think we'll probably be coming back to maybe to each of these in some future iteration. Okay. What I would propose in terms of dealing with this 4-page document is that I'd be willing to continue to consolidate things or put things together if committee members who have agreed to do some drafting on this, and that's me, one, and Honor, and I don't know if anybody else got tagged for working on that. But if you have any further comments on these sections, if you can send me those by, well, let me think about the dates while we're dealing with new business, and then we can try to get something, a second version of these, the ones that we're going to continue with, and the ones we're going to meld together back out so that we have it before the next review committee meeting, which will be the first part of March. I forget the exact date, maybe March 10th, March
10th.
March 10th. And hopefully at that meeting, we'll also, we could go through this quickly, or we can just leave it sit and get back into the longer document and pick up some of the other issues that are there.
I would just ask that in any wordsmithing, especially on duty of care, that you explain what kinds of acts a museum or federal agency might perform that would cause harm to cultural items. This is language that I'm not quite sure what you mean by acts that would cause harm. Is that research, study, other kinds of acts, or do you mean more specifically destructive analysis, other kinds of
Well, I think those are good questions. And we'll see what we can do about wordsmithing to make it clearer what's meant. But until we get to that point, Madam Chair, are we ready? Madam DFO, are we ready for new business?
Certainly, you have about 20 minutes left.
Right, okay. We've talked about the new business that I've got on my list, at least, that we need to make some resolution to and get moving on, is to how are we going to deal with the 2022 annual report to Congress is one question. Second question is, and Madam DFO reminded me of this in an email and then a subsequent conversation. This committee should put together a list of names of potential nominees that the secretary would consider for the 7th review committee member position. As Honor, who holds that position now, mentioned, her term of office is going to be up in May, as actually will both John and Barnaby's terms will be up in early May. So if we can get a list together and get that to the secretary, hopefully we could get a replacement coming in the not too distant future. So that's something we should figure out an approach to that. And then the possibility of additional meetings like this one, virtual meetings like this one in the month of April, before both, before John, Barnaby, and Honor terms are over. So let me make proposals on those for you to consider, or for us to discuss. On the report to Congress, if we set up a subcommittee, like we have done in the past for drafting the report to Congress, that subcommittee can then work independent of a full review committee meeting. It doesn't have to be in public, only the actual decision-making on recommendations and the final text needs to come to the full committee in this kind of a public meeting. So we could set up a subcommittee and at least get that process started. So I will make that as a proposal for discussion. Comments? Shelby. And then Honor.
Oh, thank you, Frank. I'd be happy to serve on this committee to put together the report for this coming year.
Okay, thank you. Honor?
Thanks, Frank. I was just wondering also if there's any update on the 7th review committee member, if there's any report on that from Melanie.
No, I have not heard any further from the department or the secretary on that appointment.
On the 7th member? I thought we were putting together a list to get a list of.
I'm sorry, the third Indian religious leader position that Armand vacated in August.
Right, okay. Okay, thanks for that. Honor, any other comments?
Yeah, my second question is, how soon do you hope to have this report to Congress completed, as 3 review committee members are rotating off? I'm happy to contribute some eyes in the time that remains for my position. But I was wondering what your time frame is for completing that.
I think that's a good question. I would actually, that might be the first order of business for the subcommittee to consider. How is that going to be handled? Tim, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think as we discussed, as I made clear when we did the last report, I strongly object to the idea of coming up with a report for a year when the year is not done yet. I think we need to make sure that our goal of the subcommittee is to have a complete draft for full deliberation by the committee sometime after October 1 of this year, so that the entire fiscal year is accounted for. And given the fact that some members of the committee, their terms will expire in May, I would propose that the subcommittee consists of all current members and any future members that are appointed between May and the next meeting after October 1, so that anyone who is a member of the committee can participate in the subcommittee if they choose to.
Thank you, Tim. Any comments on that proposal for membership? Okay, I see nodding heads mostly.
I want to ask the committee for its input on if the subcommittee is everyone on the committee. Why not hold these discussions during public meetings? I guess it seems to me to be more efficient for the discussions to occur during a public meeting if the subcommittee is made up of all members of the review committee.
But it's not a requirement. I mean, we had virtually all the members on the subcommittee for the annual report in the last instance where we put together the report that is currently being considered by the department to send to Congress. All but one.
Yes, and I'm questioning the efficiency of that effort. I would also remind the committee of the requirement that any time in subcommittee meetings needs to be approved by me because you do need to be compensated for that time. And so again, I would question the use of that time and certainly of the cost of that time and whether there's a value. I'm asking you what the value is in that being a private meeting as opposed to a public meeting.
Well, I don't think it was the privacy issue. I think it was the fact that when we had two new members who came onto the review committee and we already had a subcommittee on the annual report, they seemed to be unable to join that subcommittee. Wasn't that an instance that we had an experience with, I think, in the past? And to avoid that, I think that's what Tim's proposing. How do we avoid that?
And
so
I'm proposing that we just hold additional public meetings then to develop the report to Congress to be more efficient.
Well, I'm not sure I share your view about the inefficiency of the last go around, but if we set up a subcommittee now with the members, with however many members want to volunteer on hand, in a future full review committee meeting, we can add to the membership of that subcommittee, correct?
Yes, absolutely. But I believe that Tim was trying to avoid that, which was the issue before. So until we hold a public meeting, you couldn't add members to the committee. And
okay, now I get it.
If you're saying that the subcommittee will be everybody on the committee, I'm questioning the value of that being a subcommittee as opposed to the public meetings of the full committee.
Well, I remember that it took us, at least an hour each meeting of the subcommittee. And I think we probably wouldn't want to do that with a full committee meeting to use up as much time as that, a third of every one of our possible future meetings like this one on the video meeting to discuss the report, that report. What I'd like to do now, if we can, is set up a subcommittee so that they can begin to grapple with the schedule and how we're actually going to accomplish putting that report together, with the understanding that the report is not going to be able to be finalized until this fiscal year ends. And the membership may change because we will have 3 members possibly who might be on the subcommittee, and one or more of them, maybe all 3 of them are going to, well, all 3 of them would, I guess, unless they're reappointed, would drop off.
I guess this is my confusion, maybe. If the subcommittee is every member is a member of the subcommittee, and the first task is to decide what the schedule would be for this report to Congress. Any suggestion that the subcommittee came up with in a private session would have to be readdressed in a public session. And there's an inefficiency there in my mind of having everybody come together for a meeting to discuss something and then having to discuss it again in public to make a decision. I guess that's where I'm confused, because the subcommittee can't decide what the timing of the report will be. That will need to be brought back to the full committee to discuss. So why not just have that discussion in public? I guess that's what I'm asking. We ran into a lot of those kinds of issues, if you recall, Frank, in developing the recommendations as well. And I guess I'm trying to avoid restraining you from your discussion and formulation of recommendations when you're all together, because you're not doing it in public. It's just, there's an efficiency to be gained by having these conversations in public. Now, that doesn't preclude you from doing preparatory work on your own with each other over email. You could come up with drafts and individuals could work on it. But when you come together to discuss this, it just seems more efficient to do so publicly, where you can make decisions and move forward as everybody.
Tim, go ahead. Yeah.
As a proposal, can we all agree, all the committee members agree now, that our goal as a committee is to have a report to Congress for fiscal year 2022, a draft for full deliberation by the committee at the first meeting of the committee after October 1 of 2022?
Yes, I think we can.
Sounds like a good timeline.
Yeah. John or Barnaby, any comment? Any objection to that, I should say?
I have no objection.
No objection, Barnaby? Okay. Shelby, you're not.
I think it would work. I think it would work. Yeah.
Okay.
And
John, go ahead.
Yep. If I could, just to the Madam DFO's comments, I just want to bring up to since we're all here, that in some of those, I guess within the past year, we had some of those subcommittee meetings, or some of those things we had talked about. And just to sort of, I guess, follow up with what DFO was saying is, we had to stop short because we were venturing into discussions that needed to be had in public during those meetings, and it caused those subcommittee meetings to be cut short. I'm not going to say those meetings weren't valuable, but we had to stop short when if those meetings were held in the public forum, we could have continued further with those particular discussions and had come to some decisions rather than having to wait whatever it was, a few weeks or a month or whenever the public meeting was. When, and of course that's what occurred. We had those discussions, and then in some of those cases we continued into those parts of those discussions that had to be had in public. So that's where I can see the worth in, or the presentation in or the argument or the reasoning behind having, it's going to be the full committee, that you go ahead and have the full committee meeting in public, because as what's been presented, there's nothing precluding any committee from doing some preparatory work. It just, as long as you don't enter into any discussions that need to be had in the public forum. So I just wanted to that as a reminder that we had a few meetings where we had to stop our discussion short because we were venturing into things that needed to be discussed in public.
Thanks, Jen. Tim?
I guess my concern is the period from the end of May, when the 3 individuals on the committee's term expires, and October 1. I did some math on the amount of time that positions on the committee have been vacant. And it seems to average, I think for Shelby in my position, it was about 6 months the position was vacant. And Armin's position is starting to get pretty close to 6 months. So the likelihood that those positions are going to be filled immediately after May looks pretty small, particularly since your position, John, and Barnaby's position, the notice hadn't even gone out. And in the past, those notices have gone out at least 3 months before the vacancy, but I don't think they've been out yet. We can go ahead and make our recommendations, nominate for honors position. And I think we can do that in a fairly expeditious way, but, in the next meeting perhaps. But I am worried that the delays, the vacant positions, has the potential of crippling the committee. So I want to make sure that there is a mechanism. If we can't have a full meeting, at least we can have the people that are on the committee plus any new ones, the person that's appointed for Armin's position, continue the work.
Grady, you have a comment?
I do. Before we go too far down this technical rabbit hole, I think there's well, Tim, I appreciate your thinking, and I think we've talked about this a bit before, maybe when we were talking about meeting procedures last year. But there's a technical limit on our ability to create subcommittees, them needing to be created in these public settings by the full committee. And I don't have a precedent for, and I think this is something we found with the FACA committee coordinator for the department, that there's not a real authority for us to let members who aren't currently part of this, part of the review committee as a whole, join subcommittees outside of that process. The makeups of these subcommittees have to be determined and decided upon and agreed to by the members in these public meetings. So it's one of the reason I think this came up last year is one of the reasons that FACA committees no longer, and this committee in particular, no longer has a subcommittee as a whole option, which we found to be technically problematic when working with our FACA coordinator for that exact point. So while the members of the review committee can still meet to do administrative work, can still meet to do planning outside of this, I don't have a clear mechanism, a legal mechanism for new members to automatically be added to a subcommittee without having that day in a public meeting, that moment to be for the subcommittee makeup and the subcommittee purpose to be decided upon in this public setting.
Thanks, Grady. Thank you.
Can you provide that in writing? Your analysis of this and your discussions with the FACA coordinator for the department or GSA, if you've talked to them. I'd like to see that in writing.
I can follow up with a summary. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Hi, this is Honor.
Yes, Honor, go ahead.
So an issue that just came up was whether the other two positions that are going to be vacancy other than mine have already been published. And I believe that answer is no. So if there's an average of 6 months to fulfill a position, and we have a timeline here with the regulations and providing comments for the regulations, then how is this all going to work out? And why then has a notice not been published to fill these vacancies?
Madam DFO, do you want to quickly explain?
We're hoping to have the notice published for the vacancies very soon.
Do you know when that will happen, Melanie?
No, I can tell you that right now they've been drafted and they're sitting on my desk to move forward to the department for review and approval. As soon as I have the time to get to them, I will be doing that, and we will move them forward.
I'd like to make a recommendation to the committee to encourage the DFO to move forwd with publishing.
I'll do it tonight. I'll that's what I'll do right after this meeting. I will get them out. I just, there's been a lot happening and we're doing the best that we can to keep up. I would find it difficult to advertise for positions 6 months before they're vacant, but if that's what you're recommending we do, we could start on Frank's position as well. His vacancy is in October. So I will go ahead and add that to our list and we will get started on that as well.
I think that's probably a good idea, just given what the history of how much time it's taken.
I think we may be 1 minute over, but if I could put in a proposal on a different issue, on the honor position, on the consensus position, would it be possible for us to take this issue up at the next meeting? And that each of us that would like to nominate someone for the position be able to provide at the next meeting the name of the individual, confirmation that they would be willing to serve in the position, and a copy of their resume. And that would be incumbent upon the nominator, each of us, to pull that information together prior to the next meeting and to provide it to Melanie.
And just to clarify that the list is developed by the other members, which would exclude honor from making a nomination. The nominations need to come from the scientific and museum organization or tribal representatives. Just to be clear. So it would be the other 5 of you that would put forward names.
I'm not sure about the resume part. I'm not sure that, because if that were a public document, then that will become a public document. People might not want to have that kind of information shared. But we do need to come up with that list, Tim. So you're right, and it seems to me it would be sensible if people have ideas about who might serve in that kind of a position, that they at least talk to the individual and get some sense that they get basically a commitment that if nominated, they would accept the nomination. How did the committee members feel about trying to do that at the next meeting in that kind of a process? And do some think about who might you want to recommend for that, contact the person, and at least get some sense of whether they're interested and willing, and then we'll put that on for a new business item, or I guess by next time it'll be old business, but it'll be an item on the agenda. Madam DFO, can we do that? Okay, let's try for that.
Yes, we'll add that to the agenda.
Circling back around on the subcommittee, Madam DFO, you felt there was some urgency in actually getting a subcommittee set up, I thought, when we chatted about the new business issues that we might take up, the committee might take up. Is that not so key that we need to set up a subcommittee now at this meeting? Or maybe I misunderstood in our discussion of that matter.
My concern was about the report to Congress.
Right, that's what I meant.
My concern was exactly the same concern that Tim expressed about the timing and the likelihood of having additional members appointed between May and October 1st, and how that work would be done.
Okay. Can 1 minute. So can we go ahead and if people would volunteer to be on the committee, they could begin that discussion. Correct. Okay. Tim.
And if I can put a sort of finer point on the request that I had of Brady, it is my strong desire, and I hope it would be of the other committee members, that we are able, by the final meeting of this series, to resolve this issue about new members coming onto the committee, onto the subcommittee automatically. And I think what I would ask Brady to look at is specific prohibitions that precludes us from doing that.
Okay.
So we're not asking permission. We want them to tell us why we can't.
Okay. Okay. Then, Madam DFO, let's maybe put the
Sure, I can add makeup of a
creation,
subcommittee.
yeah, on the well, and just the creation of the subcommittee at the next meeting. Hopefully, Shelby's already volunteered. If we have others volunteers, and Tim has volunteered. So we could actually make a decision at the next one. Honors volunteered. So we can get that going forward, and then have a format for a context and a format for more discussion about subcommittee issues outside of the full committee meetings. Doesn't mean that it wouldn't come around and be asked for some endorsement by the full committee, but we at least get that started.
Brady?
I'm talking about the how do we put together the interest in the subcommittee or in the review committee of getting work started on the report to Congress, but the understanding that that the full development of that may not take place until after these new appointments get made.
I think that's exactly Tim's objection.
Well, this is why let's do it next time, okay? Because we don't have time right now. There is another issue that I would like to get the committees and the DFOs decision on. Do we want to ask the DFO to try to schedule additional review committee meetings in April? Because she needs some go ahead there. Tim says yes. And Madam DFO, are you still willing to try to do that?
I can try. It takes a while for the notices to get published, but I will add that to the tasks I do this evening. I need though dates. I do.
You need to.
Everybody to
we
tell
need to
me
tell you when we're not available.
Yes.
When we are available. Okay.
And I would suggest 2 meetings of 4 hours each would be my recommendation, similar to what we
Okay.
did in November.
But let's see if we can try that. Okay. I see general nodding of heads or agreement with that. Let's move forward, get that moving forward in any case. Then we're going to talk about the 7th member, how we're going to approach the 7th member issue at the next meeting. We're going to try to resolve some of these questions about the subcommittee for an annual report at the next meeting. for the next meeting, based upon the discussion, the substantive discussions that we had on recommendations or requests, Honor and I committed to revising certain specific parts. Will Honor, if you will send me your revisions of those parts that you agreed to by the 5th of March, I will try to do what revisions I said I would take care of by the 5th of March, and send that then to the other committee members to take a look at by the 7th. And then we can, you know, if there are comments, we can try to incorporate those comments and get something to Madam DFO in time for it to get on into the meeting materials for the March 10th meeting. And we'll continue that discussion on March 10th, as well as the discussion of the fuller February 11th dated set of comments and questions that we have. Honor.
Frank, thanks. Just a recommendation also for our next meeting. I would hope we could have public comment open in addition maybe to the beginning for a few minutes at the end of the meeting, because I think that people who are attending meetings are more informed about the issues and they're fresh in their mind as we've gone through things as a committee. So just allowing some time for a public comment right at the end would be good. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Thank you. We'll see if we can do that. As always, we have a full plate, and we got through some of it at this meeting, but not all of it. And we're going to have a full plate at the next meeting as well. So if you've got, in addition to the consolidation of the draft recommendations that I just talked about, with that Honor and I have some assignments for. If any of the others of you have comments on what's in the current text and you have some suggestions to share, please send those along as well by the 5th or before the 5th if you can do it. And again, I'll try to get something back to everybody by the 7th. Madam DFO, do you have any final thoughts that you feel like sharing?
We can, with that, we can adjourn, and we'll see everybody in about 10 days.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Hang in there.
Thank you.
Looking
We'll
forward
see
to
you.
more discussions. Take care.
See you soon.